you guys remember which HDMI it is? Isn't it 4? Huh? No, you don't know? What's going on here? Something get unplugged? Let's see here. HDMI 4. Why isn't it working then? There's the Pi. The Pi's connected. Something's not right. Shit. Oh, great. I'm just gonna maybe cycle up the TV as well. Come on. You can do this. Okay, we'll bypass that. Anything? Okay. What's going on? I mean, could be, but hopefully not. Does this thing, but then it doesn't show up here or there. This input switcher doesn't do anything. Raspberry Pi is plugged in and on. These are nicely fastened. It's on, powered. That doesn't have power, but I guess it doesn't need it. Let's go directly again to HDMI 2 or 1 or 3. HDMI 3. This is killing me. Hey, buddy. Sorry to interrupt. Did you know if there's anything quirky going on, weird going on with the TV? Yeah, outside. It's just not working. The inputs don't seem to do anything. Yeah, it just doesn't work. I can't even get the Raspberry Pi to show. Did you have anything like that? Did you lecture there yesterday? Okay. She didn't mention anything? Okay, never mind. Okay, cool, thanks. Weird. Can't get the TV to work. Backup plan. Well, it's because I'm fucking around with it right now. So I just took it out and tried directly. Because that should work, right? Like, I just care about the thing that's coming directly from... This is the Raspberry Pi, so I don't care about this. I care about this, right? So let's put that directly to 1, for example. The inputs just seem to respond too quickly. Like, they're not actually... Usually they're not this fast. It doesn't usually switch this fast. Right? The TV is usually slower. It's almost like it doesn't care anymore.
They had that presentation yesterday,
There-
Raspberry Pi.
That was in the evening?
Yeah, it was yesterday. Signal's not going out.
No, it's not because... I don't know why, actually. So, HDMI... I mean, we can check here, but that's a different issue altogether. Why is this being pulled so much? Yeah, I don't know. The thing is powered on. You know the HDMI input that has power? This device is powered on, right? Like it's connected unless somebody's fucked with it. I doubt somebody would have fucked with this. That would do it.
We also just recently installed the timer thing.
I don't think that
But
would.
it's not, I don't think that's it.
Because that's just for the power bar, right?
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah, there's this thing as well. Input power. But maybe like after cycling, it gets...
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, like after, maybe it's being after power cycle?
Yeah, could be. So should I just restart maybe?
Yeah.
Cycle them again?
Yeah, cycle that.
Cycle this and this? And then I'm on HDMI 1.
So it's not, the signal's not even
But usually, isn't it not work if it's not working to one endpoint?
No,
Or
like,
does it usually
that means
work?
it's like somewhere back. Yeah, you can do that, though.
When I plug it in, by the way, oh, here we go. Hold on. And let's check here. Nothing yet. Nothing yet. Sometimes it takes time, though, right? Did you just cycle it? Try again. Can you try again? Yeah. And it could just be the dongle. My computer's finicky with different dongles. Do you know if you can find me another one?
Sure, I can.
Ah, James, it worked. Thanks. I guess it just required cycling in the back. So something to worry about maybe with the thing we installed? Okay. We'll keep an eye on it maybe a couple of days. Right now it's just going bypassing straight to input 1. I'll fix it after lecture. But yeah, it is going to the computer. Folks, I'm All right, so sorry for the delay. I think what happened here was we installed a timer to turn the TV off because you guys probably noticed that like the TV stays on all night. And the timer's on the power bar. And I guess the power bar cycles off, which turns everything off. And then there's a bunch of devices in the back that I guess didn't like to be cycled. So maybe that's what caused it. Somebody remind me after lecture to fix all the wiring that I bypassed some stuff in the back. So somebody just remind me because I'm terrible. As you know, I have terrible memory, right? You've seen me ask your name like 300 times, right? And it will likely continue. So anyway, let's start. We're going to have a fun time together. It'll be a 2-hour lecture. There's a lot to talk about, so I apologize. It may end at 11:15. Okay? We're going to do some really cool stuff together. We're going to talk about HTTP, not too much because I know you've had a lot of talk about HTTP, specifically focusing around statelessness. And then we're going to actually, instead of jumping into cookies, which I'm assuming most of you, if not all of you, have done some reading on cookies from last night. I see some nods. And so, you know, there'll be a little bit of, it's great, like it's a hey, let's study a little bit, then let's talk about it, right? So we're going to go into cookies, but actually before going into cookies, we'll talk about solving the problem that cookies solve without actually using cookies. And so that's something that most educational journeys, when they talk about HTTP and cookies, don't go through. And I think that's a mistake, so we're going to do it my way, which is actually solving the problem without cookies, and then solving it after with cookies. And then we'll actually look at the problems that happen with each approach, or rather with the hacky approach that we'll do first, and then the proper approach we'll do with cookies and how those problems are solved. The reason I do this is often I find even experienced developers conflate the purpose of cookies, what they actually solve. And so definitely new learners, like people new to web development, conflate what cookies actually solve. They conflate it with things like, security or something, or that kind of thing. And we'll talk about security a lot in this lecture as well. So it'll actually be interesting. We'll talk a little bit about, hacking, essentially, and how it was done before and how it's a little bit more difficult today. So we'll get into like HTTP, HTTPS, those kind of conversations as well. So a lot to talk about. Of course, as you know, no slides from me, and lots of like notes here that I'll send out. I have a more polished version of the notes, so we'll write our notes, but they'll be rough. And then also I have 2 demos that we'll look at. There's going to be a demo that we'll do that's going to be simpler, not user authentication. It'll be like what a lot of blogs and websites have, language switching in the top nav usually, like English, Portuguese, what do you want, right? And then you switch. And so we're going to actually implement a version of that and then have some discussions around that. And then we'll also this one's less us implementing and more us just looking at the code. Again, using cookies, but user authentication, a very common solution that cookies are used for, right? Are you all excited? I don't have a joke to start with, and it's too late for me to spend time researching that right now, given that I spent 15 minutes with HDMI troubleshooting. Does anybody have a joke they want to share? It has to be relevant to HTTP, so probably not. Or web development. No, you can eat whatever you like during the lecture. That's okay. We'll start. I'll figure out a joke at the end. Oh, I just got your joke. Nice, nice. Actually, one time I think what a lecturer did was they actually brought in a box of cookies for the students. I should have done that. And I stopped at Tim Hortons too. I could have totally done that. Totally forgot. Okay, so I want to talk about state. Remind me, somebody, before we talk about statelessness in HTTP, which will be a thing. What is state? You've heard me say in previous lecture, right? Software is made up of 2 things. 2 things at an abstract level. Behavior, yep, and state. Yeah, behavior and state. Behavior and state together make up software, right, in its many forms. Even I would even go, and I've never said this before out loud, but I think I would go as far as to say it's even part of protocol, right? We talk about HTTP as a protocol. And so there's like behavior, like actions, like get, right? That's your function equivalent. And then there's the like state, which we're going to talk about, right? So behavior and state together make up software. State is data, as you said, right? So data is kind of like information. Is that a fair way to fair synonym? Or knowledge? Is that another way to describe that in English? Is another way to describe it awareness? No, maybe not awareness because you're getting into AI. But it's aware. It's just not like smart aware, right? It's not aware like conscious, but aware. Right? Aware of what's going on. Context. Maybe context is another word for that. Lots of synonyms, right? I like to also use another synonym, which is memory. Like it remembers things, right? It doesn't have software generally. Once you give it like a variable, hopefully it's not like, oh yeah, I forgot. Sorry, just having a bad day. It's not going to be like that, right? Unless maybe it is having a bad day where the memory is corrupted or something like that, like hardware problem, right? But generally, assuming those things are functioning properly, we assume it's not human and starts forgetting things, right? Agreed? But we do talk about HTTP being stateless. Have you heard this term? Either in readings or maybe from Nima or other lectures? By the way, have you had other people except from just Nima and me? Have you had Carl yet? Sadie. Yeah, Sadie's first lecture actually. How did that go? Yeah? Not better than me, but like overall pretty good. Overall, not bad. I'll give her the feedback. I'll give her exactly that feedback. So I heard it was decent compared to me. But that's good. What was it on? It was on like cows. CRUD, 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 but where did cows come in? Oh, nice. Okay, cool. I'll watch the video. I'm assuming she recorded it. Um, yeah, so we were talking about statelessness and how that's come up a lot. So somebody can hopefully recap really quickly then what statelessness in HTTP really means, specifically in the context of HTTP. I don't just mean stateless in general. Okay, so yeah. There is no connection is the word you use. There is actually a connection, right? There is an internet connection. There is a network connection. So I'd like you to be a little bit more specific with your word there. What do you mean by connection? I think you're on the right track mentally, but that choice of word needs to change, I think. You want to take another stab before I... There is no... No? Okay. In the back, I forget your name. Andrew? Active transfer of data. I mean, there is transfer of data. That's what HTTP is all about. It's text transport. So it's actually, the word is literally there. Say that again? There is, there is transfer of data. This is why statelessness in HTTP is actually confusing, because if we're saying state is data, HTTP is all about data, right? Data transfer or knowledge transfer, right? So what do we actually mean there when we say stateless? It is confusing, right? And I want to clarify that. We'll go with you. There's no memory. We talked about memory. Yeah, there is no memory. What a memory of what though?
Like previous transactions.
Yeah, of the client. Yeah, of that particular, like there's no, generally speaking, HTTP and vanilla HTTP, let's call it, without cookies, right? There is no recollection of who the hell you are, who the hell that client is, or what they were doing before. Right? Because it's very like, a new phone call is made for every request, right? And HTTP's job is not to track and keep a ledger of everything that particular phone number that just called, that IP address or whatever that is, that has, what do they do before? So I can apply it to this context. You know, like when they make the phone call, when the client makes the phone call, it's not like the server, and you've heard this analogy in lecture before, right? It's not like the server goes, oh, hey, what's up? We were just talking earlier, right? I remember you wanted this thing, and now do you want something else? It doesn't do that, right? So the way I like to describe HTTP instead on the opposite side of this phone call, or even in an in-person conversation, is that HTTP has amnesia. I can relate to HTTP, I can tell you that. Sometimes I worry if I have amnesia. So I like to say that the server has amnesia. Imagine having like a waiter or waitress just like having this, right? This is what HTTP is like, where every time they come to the table, they have no idea who you are, and kind of you have to start over. Yeah, so this is what we had ordered. You had come to us, and like you took our order, and then, you know, this is where we're at right now. This is what I need, right? That's kind of the way HTTP is. So there is still transfer of knowledge in that moment, right? There's data being transferred one way or the other, or both, but it's the memory of previous things that's missing. Now, also another thing that people get confused with is, well, wait a minute. TinyApp has a database, and like web servers have databases, right? But that's not really in the realm of HTTP, right? That's tracking and knowledge and history about a user, let's say. That's not HTTP related. That's just you're using a database for long-term memory. Once you know who that person is, right? Then I can be like, let me go look it up in my database. But the problem is HTTP doesn't even know who you are, so how is it going to go look? Right? That is the problem that we apparently get without cookies, right? And we're going to solve it with that, but without that even. So basically, we're pretending like. Have you guys seen the show Kim's Convenience on Netflix? No. So anyway, not really related to that show anyway. It's one of my favorite shows on Netflix. Definitely binge watched it. It's based in Toronto, so I can like relate to the scene there a little bit. Anyway. It's about a convenience store. Kim runs it, and it's like us walking into a convenience store, whether it's Kim or someone else on the other side. And to use another analogy, you know, you're a longtime customer of that convenience store because you live in that neighborhood, and yet Kim has no idea who you are every time you walk in. Right? That's essentially the problem with the amnesia problem that server has. Okay, so now the problem is that, and now the question is that I'm going to put to you. Not putting aside cookies, okay? is how would you solve that knowing what you know about HTTP? So you're limited to what you understand about HTTP, and we're going to invent, but let's pretend cookies are not invented yet. We're going to invent a way to solve this problem. And let's actually describe the problem a little bit more, okay? Let's talk about user authentication since it's the most common kind of remembering someone problem. So this is how it works, right? This is the flow. User requests a secret page or like a, an important, like a secret, has a page that has sensitive information. So a sensitive page, maybe like slash profile, my profile or whatever. Server realizes they don't know the person, right? Server, what should the server do at this point? Ask for authentication, so redirect to the login page perhaps. Redirect, so that's a HTTP 302. It does not give back any information. It just says, hey, I'd actually like you to go somewhere else, which is, let's say, slash login. At that point, client, I should say client here, right? Client get requests to slash login because client follows that redirect. It's behaving well, right? That's the browser. So far with me? Going a little bit faster because I want to make sure we're not too far into lecture. And then what happens to the server? Server displays the login page, I guess. That would be an HTTP 200. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, you're allowed to see this page. Here's the form HTML. And then the client or user fills out the form and click submit. Client makes I guess a post because it's submitting information. Is that fair? Let's just say to the same path. It doesn't have to be the same path, but it is a different action, right? And at this point, the server will say, server validates, and everything checks out. So the auth credentials check out, right? Like, cool, your email and password match. Let's say if it was email and password. And so what should the server do at this point? It should hopefully remember that you are now logged in, right? But let's pretend that we're not doing that. We don't have any of that mechanics built in. So what would actually happen in a bad scenario here if we weren't doing that is the server will say, okay, all cool. And then the server would redirect you hopefully back to where you were hoping to get to, right? Slash profile. So that's going to be a 302 again. And then at this point, of course, the client will make that GET request because it's following the 302. And then the server will be confused again because they have amnesia, right? So server's going to get back. What's going to happen here? Server's just like, I don't know who you are, right? Because it's a new phone call, new transaction, new engagement in this convenience store analogy. And so the server's just going to be like, I guess what step? It's going to be going back to step 2, right? So we are now in an endless cycle where the user cannot log in. Right? This is our problem state. Agreed? And we're going to solve this. Of course, the right way to solve this we'll find out is with cookies, but we're going to solve this the wrong way and figure out what the problems there are. Okay? So I want you to actually help me solve that. I'm not going to tell you the answer. So knowing what you know about HTTP. And again, putting aside cookies, tell me how you would potentially invent a solution that solves this problem. And it's okay, there are wrong answers, but let's hear them. If you want to take a guess, that's totally cool.
You can make a variable on the server. It's called login true.
I'm just going to write down the answer so we can all see the answers because I'm sure everybody can't hear them. That doesn't mean that they're right, okay? Make a variable on the server. And just assign like a boolean like logged in true or false. And I'm glad you answered that, and I'm glad because that's a good talking point about why that's not a good solution. Make a variable on the server and assign it true false. Why is this not going to work? It's a good answer, but it's not really going to work for a real application. Sorry, Helena? Yeah, exactly. We don't have one client. If we only had one user ever, not even just one user in the database, but one potential connection that only one type of computer can connect. Okay, one source. Then this is a good solution potentially, right? But that's not ever the case with HTTP servers. Can't guarantee that, right? So this is state for one possible not user but one connection, and therefore not feasible for anything beyond that, which is typical. We need the beyond that. We would need an array of booleans, right? Because we have an unlimited set of, but at that point we don't know which boolean array element, is it 0, 50, actually belongs to that particular session, that particular connection. So we have to somehow identify that, and we'll realize that that's not really something we can do on the server side. We can't even have an array of booleans because we won't know which one to flip to true or false. Anybody else want to take that thought forward? Yeah. Yes, there is an IP. Yes, you can access IP address. Like for example, when you go to what is my IP address, it'll show you your IP address right now, right? So that must be somehow transmitted through HTTP. I forget exactly how. But anyway, yes, the answer is yes. So I'm glad somebody said IP address. I'm glad you said IP address. Remember your name again? Theo. So IP address is another answer that I frequently hear when I ask this question of students. Can somebody tell me why that also doesn't work? Yep. Yeah, like if you all went on to exactly that, if you all went on to the same website that I just described, what is my IP address right now, you will all have the same IP address. You'll have a different internal IP address. Like if I click my Wi-Fi, whoa, why is my power not plugged in? That's not cool. That's dangerous. If I option click on a Mac, my thing here, and you can option click yours, and you'll find that we're connected to maybe the same router, and it won't show us our external IP address, I don't think, but it does show us a unique internal IP address. These will be unique to all of us, but this is not what you'll see on what is my IP address, I believe. I believe that's your internal IP address, but let me just confirm that. 192.168. So yeah, that is internal. So yeah, we're going to see different ones if we option click our little Wi-Fi thing on the top. But if I go to what is my IP, right, and I bet you if you did the same, you're going to have the same number. And so we cannot uniquely guarantee that an IP address means a unique connection. Even cell towers potentially, I'm guessing, have, maybe 5 or 10 public IP addresses, but they have hundreds of connections on them, right? And so those hundreds of connections will share those 5 public IP addresses. I'm just making up numbers, but you get the idea? And so because of that clustering, we cannot guarantee IP address as a unique way of doing that. Now you might next guess, MAC address, which you may or may not know about. MAC address is something that's unique to a particular computer, but because of privacy reasons should not and is not exposed to the outside world. So we made efforts to maintain that privacy, and MAC address is not transmitted over HTTP. Okay, that would be unique. In fact, when the the App Store, when it first came out, iOS, an app developer could access the device ID and actually get the MAC address essentially of an Apple device, and that led to a lot of very personalized tracking, because basically what you can't do on a web server, you could do. What you can't do through the browser, you could do through the iOS app, and they had to take that away eventually, not realizing somehow they didn't learn the lesson from the internet. I don't know why, but Apple had to learn that lesson again, right? And so we don't have any unique way of identifying the user. So we don't have that mechanic, and that's what we know about HTTP. So somehow we're going to still have to solve this without actually being able to uniquely identify a connection. Be like, oh, that's your laptop from there, Because ultimately that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that your Chrome is logged in, right? But your Firefox, I guess, isn't, right? Still need a solution. All right, Anita was first. Yeah. Header information. Yeah, header information has IP address. It has other things, but there's no, again, there's no unique thing in there, right? Unless you're thinking something specific. Yes, that's getting into basic auth, which we're not talking about here. And also, it doesn't really work in the way that that you're in this context. It doesn't help us with anything. Kind of. Yeah. So it doesn't really. We. Yeah. I'll have to think about my no answer to that a little bit more, but essentially, it doesn't really apply here. Yep.
So you know how in the URL we have like the semicolon or the colon, and then we can put it something in the URL.
Yeah, you're onto something.
So you can put like you can require the user to put in their username in the URL each time they access the page.
Yep. So where is state? This is the question, right? Where is state already that the client is transferring to the server with every request? Like, what is going through with every request? Well, there's two things that every HTTP request has. What are those two things? State and behavior, right? So what's the behavior? Get, post. So it's the verb. Hey, I want to get. And then there's the path. What do you want to get? Right? So the URL is the path, right? Contains context. I want this, right? Can we not attach the username to the URL? Not the colon, but question mark. Right at the end of the URL, we have a question mark that we can add. I'm sure you've seen it on websites that you've accessed, right? Like if I just go on Google right now, in fact, even right now, look at this, right? This is all quote-unquote optional parameters that are attached to a request, right? And this is common with things like search forms, where we'll see the actual query in the URL. I'm guessing you've noticed that when you go search for something on, I don't know, Facebook or Craigslist or whatever. You see the query that you're searching for, the details that you've submitted there. Yeah.
So if you knew the syntax of Google's like API software, you technically bypass using the thing or type that into your.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I don't need to actually use their form. I can actually change the query to be like, what is my, I don't know, what is my, yeah, where is my IP? You know? And now I'm at where is my IP? Right? And sometimes in some sites I find that this is so hard to use, I just prefer to use this sometimes, you know? But you get the idea there, right? Like there's state information there. So can't we, it doesn't have to be a good solution, but it is a solution. Can we not just put maybe not the password, right? But maybe the username? And so what would happen here is, let's go ahead and fix this, okay? So the client would make the post to log in, and the server would say, okay, cool, that checks out. And then it would redirect to /profile, question mark. Let's just call it U for short. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a variable name, a key name. Equals. And then let's say they had used KV. And so this would be the actual value there. And so that would be where the client ends up going. And at that point, the server would say, server would notice the U parameter, because it's always looking for that parameter, I guess, in this particular pattern. It's always just, hey, I guess I sent that down, so maybe I should look for it. And then server looks up user with name KV. Successfully, I guess, in this happy path, right? Things are looking good. And then server renders the secret profile, secret sensitive profile page with my information. That's specifically for me when I'm logged in. Okay. There are a number of problems with this solution. Can we agree to that? We're going to talk about those problems. I'm going to erase this because this was just temporal. Is that okay? All right. So let's talk about problems. Actually, we're right here. Problems with this approach. And so technically we have done that. Talking about problems with this approach now. Yeah. Yeah, anyone can start guessing usernames without using the form. They don't even have to use the form. They can bypass the form because we saw that with Google. And they can just be like username equals, I don't know, whatever. AA. Let's just try, right? Because they've seen that there's a pattern here, right? So let's call that impersonation. They're trying to impersonate someone else, right? Yeah, that's one problem. And we're going to find that's a security problem, right? We're going to find there's a bunch of problems that fall under security with this. Other problems or security problems? Yeah, sure. Remember your name? Saul? That's a really good one. Usually people don't think about that, so I'm glad that you did. The link is, what do we normally do with links, right? We share them often if they're not too super, like, if they're relevant. The link is not shareable, or rather, if you share the link, let's go the other way, right? If the user accidentally or intentionally shares the link, they are sharing their authentication access, right? They're now actually letting somebody else impersonate, letting the entire internet impersonate them. That's not cool, right? What else? Now think about like a website where there's not only the profile page, but there's other pages that are secret, right? Slash change password, slash my listings, right? And so how would these URLs, if I click on let's say a button on that page, on my profile, username equals KV, if I click on a button that says my listings, and I go to slash my listings, right? So that I can see what things I've put on Facebook Marketplace or whatever that is, right? Then there would be a request, right, to that, which the server would be confused again because it's like, what's your username? Right? So it actually can't be my listings. It would have to be my listings u equals KV every time to any important secret page. Do we agree? And so that state information, because every request is stateless, has to be persisted, and the client has to remind the server who they are. Right? And so what is a negative, I guess, of having it this way? I guess I would say every internal link needs to append $u equals username. Be something like this in EJS. Something like that. Right, you've already done a little bit of EJS, so I'm guessing you can relate to that. It's dynamic, rendered into the href of a link, let's say. Agreed? So that's kind of a negative. The developer has to think about that. Maybe it's conditional, right? It's annoying. And also, what other problems come with that? One that I'll throw out there is that the URL, even if somebody doesn't guess, let's just say that's one security problem. But like the other is that your information is on your browser. It's on your tab, on your address bar, right? So URL contains sensitive info that anyone can see. Literally, when they look at your computer, when they look at your Facebook or whatever that app is that's doing this stupid thing, they would see and be able to access your account that way, right? There's one more that is obvious, but often we forget. What do we want to actually, what's the expected behavior with authentication? Like once you authenticate with a particular application, let's say GitHub, what are you expecting from your device, from your browser? Yep, so on that tab only? Or can I open up another tab and go to GitHub and I'm still logged in? Right? Can I do this with this approach? I'd have to like make sure that I type this in, right? So I technically can't, right? Like I mean, I guess I could with browser history, but like I would have to be very explicit. If I'm just going to github.com, that tab on another tab, it's not going to remember who I am. So it doesn't actually go cross tab, right? The session is only really active via the URL and therefore not shared across multiple Windows tabs of that browser. Right? It's not at the browser level, it's just at the tab level. Right? So these are the problems I can think of. Is there anything else that I've forgotten? But we did solve it, right? We just didn't solve it well. But like we can and we are reminding the server every time who we are. It just so happens that exposes a bunch of security problems. Right. Now, at that point, the server can have an object like you do with TinyURL, TinyApp, where you have an object of data, which we call the database. It's not really a production level, production grade database, because as soon as we restart our app, it doesn't. The database gets wiped because it's in memory. But we could, at that point, it's not about HTTP. It's about how you've programmed the actual long-term persistence, right? Is it using a SQL database like we'll learn later? Is it using something like Mongo, which we'll learn soon? Or is it an object database, which is not really long-term, right? Like as in an in-memory database, sorry. That's kind of later on. But first we need to know who to look up, right? Before we can then go to the database. And that's the problem we're solving here. Is this everybody's good with this? To me, this is this whole strategy that we just did, where we actually made it the responsibility of the client, because we gave them a specific string like KV. This whole like delegation of responsibility that you have to come to me to tell me who you are with every request, like /profile. This reminds me of like when you go to the gym, right? They have so many members, they don't know who's who. They're not going to recognize you by face. So what do? They give you a membership card, right? And you scan that. You go to the YMCA, you scan your guest pass, which contains some kind of thing in there. It doesn't contain probably all your data. It just contains your key to look up your data. So you scan that via RFC or something. Then they have their database, which then shows them potentially your face and information. And then the gate unlocks, right? And then you can go to the secret profile page, equivalent, the gym, right? And so the responsibility of tell me who you are is transferred over to the individual. Or in the analogy of walking into Kim's Convenience, you'd have to say, this is my name every time, right? And then they would remember who you are after that. But for some reason, they can't remember your name. It sounds like me, right? Sounds a lot like me. So is that overall, we're feeling good with that? And also our solution, are we feeling good about our solution? Maybe not, because there's so many problems with it that are making it completely not usable for at least something as sensitive as user authentication, right? But the important distinction is here that state can be transferred and context can be provided if we really want to, even beyond just one page request, because we can keep copying that U equals KV every request, right? And so we've kind of made sure that we understand that a little bit before going forward. Okay, so what we'll do now is I want you to what do I want you to do? I guess we're going to take a break, and then we'll talk about the language switcher exercise, which will use cookies and user authentication as well. Let's take a break, then we'll talk about cookies, but really through coding and how this problem gets solved with cookies, and then we'll revisit these problems and see which ones are actually solved by cookies versus not. Okay. All right. Let's meet again in 5 to 6 minutes. Cheers. kidding me? Okay, doke. So we shall resume. Um, so we left off talking about the problems with the approach that we came up with, and now we're going to talk about life with cookies that are going to hopefully make this process easier. Um, so actually, what I'll do is, before we get into the code, somebody tell me how cookies do the above, this whole thing that we did here, starting like right here, step 9, how cookies would be different. So we can even write these out again, but with cookies. Let's actually move them down, perhaps. So once there's success on the credentials, what was it, number 8? Just move that down here. So server validates that the stuff that the user put in the login page is correct. How would this be different? We would ideally not want to use this anymore, right? And so we don't need this, but somehow we're going to use cookies to solve that. So somebody tell me how that works based on what you've read. Based on what you've read, how does that work? Yep.
The server will store a cookie with the unique user ID
Sure.
to look up the
Yep.
login credential and login email password.
Yeah. So I'm just going to quote you here. Server will store the, let's say, the KV, right? The unique key. In this case, the username that we're using. It doesn't have to be, but KV. But what do you mean by the server stores? The server will store. I think that's what I want to drill into a little bit more. So do you know what you mean by that?
I mean, like the server will have retain some memory of who is
The server can't have memory. Already gave you that as a restriction.
the browser will store the cookie.
Right, you're onto something. So Anita, did you want to take that from there? Yeah. So the whole idea that we did with the URL is still the same pattern that cookies do. There's no difference from that perspective. The server's not taking responsibility for it. It's saying you remember, here's the ID card. I'm not going to remember who you are. You're going to remember who you are. And then you're going to show that card every time you try to access the profile page. And so the server actually redirects to the profile so that they can access. But before doing that, or while doing this, in the same response, because it's request response, right? While also setting cookie u, let's just call it the same thing, equal to kv. So there's going to be a set cookie involved here to tell the browser, hey, by the way, I want you to store this in your cookie thing. So the browser is now behaving well for us, and as long as it supports cookies, which all browsers do these days, most browsers. And so it will say, okay, cool, I know what that directive means. I know I got to put this for this website, not for any website. For localhost, let's say, I need to put this in memory, right? And then the client gets requests to profile with all the cookies it has for that domain. So in this case, it would be u equals kv, would be involved. So it would say something like cookie, and then it would show u equals kv, right? And so again, the server would notice the u param, but instead of the u param, it's not in the URL anymore, right? We're going to cross that out. It's actually, I think that's how you cross something in Markdown. It's actually in the cookie, right? The cookie jar. I think actually some places call it cookie jar, believe it or not. Right? And then the rest is the same, except now my listings, if it were a button, doesn't also need to append the user, because we're not going to care about what's in the URL there. We're not going to listen. We're not going to use u from the URL. We're going to use u from cookie, right? And what's nice is that the browser, we should mention here, when they click anywhere on that site now, unless the user has cleared their cookies, which I'm guessing you know as a functionality in browsers, right? You know about the clear all browsing history in cookies. Did you know, as of like 6 months ago, the change that Chrome made silently? When you clear your cookies now, your Google cookies are not cleared. How effed up is that? Isn't that crazy? It's a good question, because that is like getting into antitrust, right? But it's like, oh, it's for convenience, right? Because you want to see that you want to still access your Google stuff. That's getting dodgy. Like, that's pretty crazy that now if you clear your cookies, it doesn't clear all your cookies. Yeah, I know. Look, maybe it's changed again. I haven't kept on top of that news, but like I remember reading this going, holy shit. And people said, holy shit, but you know how things are with privacy. A bunch of people say, holy shit, and then like we all forget about it, right? New people are born, they have no idea there was a holy shit moment, right? And life continues. But yeah, so assuming that that's cleared or not cleared, my listings would happen which would include u equals kv in the cookies. And so again, the server would be able to grab that and say, oh, that's who you are, right? You're indirectly doing that without realizing it. It's in your request headers, and we'll see that when we are coding. Yep.
Can the user physically edit their own cookies?
Yes, and we'll do that actually. The question was, can the user physically edit their own cookies? And we will actually simulate that.
Yeah, so couldn't you do, like, this doesn't fix the problem that we had before with the URL.
Well, we're going to talk about what problems are going to be fixed or not. Yeah, right? Like, we're going to revisit those numbered problems. Absolutely. But let's actually do a demo, because I want to get to code, and then we can come back to the problems. Is that okay? Because otherwise it's too much talking and text, right? So let's actually look at an example. The first example I have is a simpler example. It's not the user auth. We won't do that one first. Instead, we'll do the language selection. So I've got that node server running already. It's running right here under language selection. And so this language selection app, let me walk you through it. If I go to the home page, this is supposed to kind of simulate, you know, a realistic app, even though it's not one, where in the nav or somewhere you're asked to choose a language, and it'll default to English, right? And so in the nav, it's like, would you prefer the site in English or French? And you can click, and it will switch. But there are multiple ways to solve this problem. What we're going to do is we're going to use cookies to solve it. Okay? So what that really means is when I click English, which is not working right now, we have to implement this. When I click these, it should remember what I selected, so that when I come back, even another tab, it will remember that language. Okay? So what I can't have is English just taking me to /English, and that's English, and just taking me to French, and that's French, and then not remembering that I've selected French for the future pages that I visit. Okay, so we actually have to remember. Okay? So we have to make this, we have to actually implement this together as a class, and that'll be fun times. So let's take a look at the code. So the welcome is what gets rendered, what you see in front of you. And so these links will have to be implemented, because right now they don't go anywhere. They're just pound, which means like just nothing, just something on the page that doesn't actually have an ID. So I guess top of the page. And so we want to implement that. And then on the actual JavaScript, I'll just leave this up. This is the Express code. It'll be very familiar to you. So hopefully you can scan this really quickly and tell me what it does, because it does not much, right? Is this viewable, or should I do this? Is this better? Why didn't you tell me? Andrew, it's all your fault. Yeah, so not much happening. Express is being it must be npm installed, I guess, because it's successfully required. And then we boot up Express. This is very similar to your Tiny App code. Slightly different code in terms of port. I think maybe it doesn't really matter. We use the port to start up the server, start listening for connections, just like your Tiny App. We're using EJS, just like your Tiny App, and we're using app.get, just like your Tiny App. Okay, and all it is saying is on the home page / so on the root path, we just want to render welcome right now. Of course, we're gonna have to modify this a little bit. So what we want as the ideal behavior is that the actual home page, which simulates really any page, is smart enough to render either English or French instead of just welcome. So if you had selected English as your preferred language, it would actually say welcome, and it would show you the English home page. And for French, it would say this: bienvenue is how you say that. That's the correct pronunciation. Okay. It's not, but I don't care. And so we want that to happen, and we're gonna have to implement that. So who wants to guide me through that a little bit? It could be just the first step if you prefer. What do I do as my first step? Remember that I, as a developer, like to work very incrementally, and remember that I like to work with errors first. Do you remember that? So that's just to throw you out, because otherwise you would have gone into probably a different direction. Let's do it my way. Okay. So error first. Yep. Andrew. Testing it out. So I should have some kind of an error that I can fix, right? Like right now, I guess this is an error, and that's not really an error, but like something that's not working. So I guess I could consider that to be my first thing I tackle, and say that maybe when I click English, it should go to /lang/English. Now, this is going to make a GET request, because anytime you click a link, it's a GET request, right? But let's just pretend it's a post, because I just want to keep this simple. Okay, so we're going to make a post request, right? And what the goal of this is not to render the English page. It's to say that my preference is now English. So you could call this preference English if you really want to, but I'm just going with language preference, or lang, right? And maybe I'll keep this short because language codes are often in 2 letters. So EN for English. Yeah, I could make it English, but just being more programmatic about it. Okay, so that's my change. I click this, and now this should go to, after refreshing, it should go to lang en, which is supposed to switch my preference via cookies to English, right? I click it, and I cause the error. My hypothesis was there would be an error because that path does not exist. And so now I'm going to implement that path. Notice that incremental approach that I'm doing with errors first. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and now, remember, anything I do in this file, I'm going to have to restart the server. In the template, it's okay, right? So I'm going to need an app.get /lang/en. And here, if I just leave this blank, which is the minimum amount of code that I can write, I'm going to have a problem, right? What's my problem going to be? Restarted the. Yeah, it'll just stay stuck here, because in Node, not in other frameworks, but in Node, it is asynchronous, and so it thinks you're just taking your time, and you'll eventually call that, due to its asynchronous nature, but it doesn't know that you're not going to call it ever, and so it's just waiting for that long thing to finish, which it never will finish, and then it will eventually time out. So we're just going to cancel that, and we'll do the very simple thing, which is just send a string, even though that's not our solution, right? Incremental, and so we're going to restart that. And now when I hit refresh here, I expect to see that thing. And so now English is taking me to the thing, which is not what I want, but it's closer to what I want, right? What I want is not to see the English. I can't just do this, okay? If I do this, this will work. I'm now rendering English, and I'll get the English home page. But that's not what I want. I want to remember that they've selected English, and then take them back to the home page, at which point it should automatically show the English page instead of the options page, okay? So really, I don't want to do this. I actually want to set the cookie to remember their language preference. Okay. So my error state here is that I'm seeing this instead of getting back to the home page. So maybe I do a redirect back to the home page instead. And then I'll notice that my error issue is that I get back to the home page, but it still doesn't know what I preferred. Okay. It should instead just show the English page, right? So we're gonna change that a little bit. Now, what do I do next? Set the cookie, but that would be a solution, not the problem. So how do I have to know how. The reason I do error-driven development is I want to know how to verify that what I've done is with that line of code, I've solved a problem. So I have to first see the problem. So what is my thing that I'm going to look at after I write that code? How am I going to verify that it worked? Without writing more code, ideally. Because if I set the cookie here, then I have to do some more code to make sure that that cookie is set. But what's nice is I have DevTools, right? And I can actually use that as my way of validating whether the set cookie worked or not. Okay. So before, when I go to English and I click on the network tab and I look at the request to /en/lang, which is right, or /lang/en, I should say, we see that it does a 302. But we see in the response, this is the response here, there's no mention of cookie. Okay? And we're going to solve that problem. So how am I going to do that? It's in the response. The cookie is being set in the response, right? It is the response back from the server. So it won't be on the request. On the response, we're going to set the cookie. Now, depending on the framework that we're using, it'll have different functions. Express, how do you set a cookie? I think it's just .cookie as a function call with 2 values. So you could be like key value, right? But in our case, we're going to set the lang to be en, right? Might as well follow that convention. And then we redirect. So let's see that in action. Let's restart our server. Let's not forget to do that. Otherwise, we'll just think it's not working. And then we're going to refresh this page, but really, let's clear our network log, click English, and notice that I have preserve log checked. And so what that does is it shows me both before the redirect as well as after, because there's 2 requests here. There is the en lang that sends the redirect back, the 302 as we say, and then our browser does a request to where it was redirected. So we really care about the initial request, right? Because that's where we set the cookie, and what we expect in the response is a set cookie. Okay, this is how I'm working incrementally to make sure every step my hypothesis is correct, right? Again, something that I find tutorials and even us making the mistake of not really, using that philosophy. So far, so good, or am I going too fast? It's okay? Any questions so far? Yeah. Good question. Good question. How would you validate? You'd maybe want to put 2 in and see what happens? Right? See, I'm curious. I mean, I kind of know the answer, but let's just see. If I do, I don't know, something else, right? And then I go, I guess I got to restart, right? And then I go back to the home page, refresh, clear the log, click English, click on this thing. Oh, interesting. I get 2 set cookies back because it's setting 2 cookies on that particular response. It doesn't care the cookie's already there because it was already set for lang. It's just like, hey, I want you to set these 2. I don't care if you already have them, just this is the new value. Right? So this is the process I'd like you to take as you're working incrementally towards the features that you'll be working on today. If you don't do it incrementally, and you don't have this debugging mindset, because it's slightly different with HTTP and using DevTools and stuff, you will likely spend more time debugging the wrong way, I guess, right? Or have more to troubleshoot than maybe you're comfortable with. One step at a time, right? So that answers your question, hopefully, Theo, right? So now what we do is we've got the language set. And actually, the other thing I want to show you is, as a result of it being set in my application tab, it used to be in a different tab, but Google's reorganized this stuff a few years ago. Under application cookies, there's the domain, because cookies are scoped by domain. You're not going to see your Facebook cookies here, because that would be a security issue, right? We see the cookies that have been set. Sometimes there's a bug in this particular thing. I think they haven't fixed it for however long. Sometimes the cookie changes and it still doesn't show, so you just have to hit refresh. Don't trust the values here. Just hit refresh, which is this little, not like refresh Command R, but just the refresh here to refresh these values. Okay, write that down as a, by the way. So cool. There's two ways of validating this stuff. One is like at the request, because on this request, for example, there's no set cookie. It was really on the redirect one, on the en lang that sets the cookie. That's the only place we set the cookie on the response. Cool. So now that the cookie is set, we should be able to read the cookie, yes? And so I am going to be able to, now I'm working incrementally, right? Now my next error is that the home page isn't rendering English. It's just still rendering welcome. What it should do is render English, right, if the cookie is set to en. Right? And then we should have an else for that. Right? And so I'm going to have to implement this logic. But before I even do, I'm working, I just want to see the value of the cookie. Like I want to know how to access it. I don't know how yet. Okay? So somebody tell me what they would do to, I mean, one option is to go read the docs, which is always a good option, but there should be other good options. What's another good option? You know that the cookie is going to be on the request, not on the response. So what could you do? Yeah, you're onto something. Check by how? How do I discover, how do I read the cookie? I haven't read the docs yet. I don't know where the cookie is. How do I get that string en now at this request? I could just console log the request. See what's in there. Now, this may or may not work. I'm experimenting. Right? Let's take a look. And this is on the home page, so I'm just going to refresh here, and then I'm going to view my console log on the terminal, and see that there's a huge object that gets output to the screen of type, I guess, incoming message. Huge. Now, I don't want to go and read this, but I know I could maybe look for the word cookie in my terminal. I was smart enough to hit Command K to clear the entire history so that when I made the request, it's clean, and all I see is that object, and I can search on this whole terminal session. So I'm going to use Command F and type in cookie. And lo and behold, under headers object, there is cookie. Because it's coming through HTTP, Express is not going to hide it from us, right? It's like, yeah, here you go, here's the cookie. It's part of the request headers. And everything else is in here too, like host, user agent. So we should see all of these in the request headers. Host, user agent, right? All these are there being sent up. And so if I wanted to read the cookie, I guess what I would do is dot headers, because these are just objects, right? Object.property dot, what is it called? Cookie? It's singular for some reason. Right? And so if I console log just that, and I hit refresh, I should see that value. Right? Now, what's interesting is that this is a string. Right? So for me to parse the cookie, I'd have to like, I guess what would I have to do? Dot split on semicolon, and then loop through each, and then split on equals for the key value. That's annoying. And every app has to do that? Nah, thanks. We'll make the library to do that. Right? And so this is where cookie parser comes in, so that we don't have to do the dot split twice and looping and all that. And so we're going to use cookie parser, which I'm guessing you've already read about, if I'm not mistaken. But the reason I actually didn't use it right off the bat is people conflate cookie parser thinking that it enables the use of cookies in Express. It doesn't. It just does the parse thing that we could do ourselves anyway. Okay? Important distinction. That's why it's called cookie parser, not cookie enabler or something. Cookies are part of HTTP. You don't need to enable them. Right? Okay, so I'm going to restart my app because it's already installed as a module. It's in my package.json. Right? And so I'm now going to, now what's nice is this is a middleware. App.use means register a function that will do some stuff before I get to my handler, my callback. And so some things will have been mutated in the request for convenience sake. So now for convenience sake, we can actually do request dot, I think it's cookies, And now we will have access to that. Otherwise, it would have been undefined. So when I hit refresh here, I get a nice object. I can just grab .lang now. I don't have to like parse it, right? You see that both the cookies are there? Right. Now just to drive the point home, the cookies are coming from where? From the browser. The client is sending them with every request. They're not stored anywhere in a Boolean or anything like that on the server, right? And there's no variable on the server. So if I was to go into my application and go in here and decide that I don't like this cookie because I have control, my browser is in my control, right? I can delete that cookie, and now I'm left with 1. So now when I hit refresh, without having to restart the server or anything, because I haven't made any code changes, I hit refresh, and I'm getting back 1, right? If I decide I want to, look what just happened. It went empty. See the bug? I have to hit refresh to see it. Isn't that weird? WTF, Google. But yeah, I could change it to French and just hit refresh on the page, and now it will send up French, even though it's not showing that. What the? Let's try again. Okay, let's hit refresh. It's not working. What's going on? Let's try another tab. And by the way, on the other tab, my cookie's still there. That's the other thing that we've benefited here, right? There we go. FR, enter. Hit refresh. Oh, you know what? It might be because I'm in incognito? No. I've done this before. This is a bug in the new version of Chrome. They keep breaking this. So anyway, pretend that I was able to change this with FR, right? And it will have changed. You can download a Chrome extension called Cookies something, and it will give you a tab here called Cookies, which you can then use to modify cookies because they had removed that feature, and then they had brought it back. I don't know. It's really confusing. Either way, whether it's through a Chrome extension or not, you can change the values, right? Because they're in your control. So far, you're with me, or am I talking too fast? Yes to both? That's okay, as long as you're with me. So now I can say if request.cookies.language, which could be like not set, completely undefined, but that's okay. If it's undefined, it's not going to equal en, is it? Right? If it's that, I'm going to render English. Otherwise, I'm going to render welcome. Did I have a typo in there? That was okay. Yeah, so a question from Andrew in terms of cookies versus cookie. Just to recap, cookie is the string, the raw string, which we have to parse, which comes with Express and HTTP. Right? It's just passing it through. We installed a middleware called, sorry, it's headers.cookie. We installed a middleware that's called Cookie Parser, which adds an object into our request object for convenient cookie access. So this actually gets set by the Cookie Parser middleware that we've installed. Okay, so that's why it's there. If you try to access it without the middleware enabled, it'll be undefined. So middleware allow you to like mutate the request for convenience sake, right? Or other things like that, not just that. And so we're using a third-party middleware instead of defining our own. We could have done this with our own middleware as well, but we decided not to. Okay, because it's already built by someone else. I bet you that's someone else. Now I'm kind of digressing here. I don't have time to digress, but humor me. I bet you that module, Cookie Parser, was written by, who built this? No. Well, maybe. Okay, I guess I was wrong in my assumption. I thought it was TJ. So TJ's, does anybody know about TJ? TJ, I think that's his handle. This guy here. TJ Hollowaychuk. Lives in Victoria. And is one of the most, at a time, Right now, I think he's more active in the Go community, but he is responsible for a lot of the code that we are using. Express.js was built by him. And a lot of modules and middleware that were added on to Express were built by TJ Holloway-Chuck. So it's really cool that this like 20-year-old-ish kid at the time who had built a lot of what is being used by big companies because they use open source software, and a lot of them use Node. For example, LinkedIn uses Node, Facebook, and all these companies use Node, and oftentimes will use Express as their go-to framework, and it's written by a dude, and a lot of it was originally written by a dude in Victoria, not maintained by him anymore, but still pretty cool, right? So anyway, digression. So yeah, we're hoping that this will work, where we are now able to read the cookie lang, and if it's English, we'll see English here. And so let's restart the server, and instead of seeing this page, I expect to see the hello in English page, and of course, for French, we'll do something very similar. Right? Something like that. Then we'll go with French. Right? But we need to set the cookie to French or FR for that to work. Now, normally what I do in my demo is just literally switch it here. But by golly, that is not working. Let's try it one more time. It's English right now. Switch to French. Leave it for a second. Hit refresh. What the hell? Yeah, I don't know why. But if I had that Chrome extension, then that would work. I don't have it enabled on incognito. Okay. So we have to actually set it to French. So what we'll do is we'll quickly implement that, which kind of sucks. Back to our welcome /lang/fr, right? And in here, how would I implement lang fr? Copy paste? Right, I could do this. Is there a better way? Copy paste is kind of a little bit of a code smell to me. Any ideas? You already know this. You already know a way of doing this. You just have to apply it here. What is it? Yeah, with the parameters, exactly. So it's the thing that I want to access from the URL. I can call it whatever I want. And then let's just even assume that it's correct and request.params, I believe, .lang, right? So just like cookies, it's an object that's available to us. There's already a params parser built into Express, right? And so now, when I go here, let me just refresh. Oops, I have a typo. Now when I hit refresh, I click French. It sets the cookie to French, FR, which then means when it goes back to the home page, I see bienvenue. Okay? Which means good venue. Oh wait, no, that's bon. Totally screwed that up. I always joke that I know French. I only know like 2 things in French, which is like je suis poulet. That's what I know how to say. Which is not even the right way of saying I am chicken. But that's all I know how to say in French. That's literally it. That's what I learned in grade 8. Okay. Any questions so far? Before we move on to user auth. Say that again? What do you mean by breaks the root? Oh, no. Yeah, I see your question. When I render, it does not return automatically. So if I render twice, for example, it will run the render twice, which will result in an error. Or if I try to render and redirect, you can only do one of those, right? Because you've decided to close the connection at that point. And you finalize what you want to do, and you can't do both. So you have to explicitly return and terminate that function if you don't want this to happen. I mean, the way I've done it here is with an if-else if, so only one of these 3 branches will run, right? But if I accidentally left a redirect in here, then no matter which of these three it would do, it's going to do a redirect. It's going to try and do a redirect, which would fail. Okay. I'm guessing some of you were like, "Oh, that's what my problem was yesterday." Is that what was happening? Okay. Good to know for sure. So let me ask you a question then. If nobody is anybody else have a question? Yep.
Yeah, so the cookies are stored in like a file on the client's computer somewhere?
Exactly. They're in the browser somewhere in some temporary folder, maybe under like in a Mac it's like application support, Chrome, somewhere in there in a folder. Some kind of file on disk. The reason we know it's a file on disk is if I restart my computer, okay, or restart the browser even, it still remembers the cookies. So therefore it's longer term persistence. It's a disk persistence. Okay. Yeah.
General question: if you don't have a return statement in the function, does it do it automatically, or does it just like what happens after?
What happens if a function doesn't have an explicit return clause or statement? It's the same as having return undefined. So the function returns undefined for that reason. Yeah, it's implied, which is basically the lack of a return, right? Because it's not returning any value, so it's returning undefined. Yeah, that's JavaScript specific. In Ruby, it's nil. So if you don't return something from a method, it just returns nil by default as well. Similar. Yep. Any other questions about this stuff? So let me ask you a question then. Is this a good solution for language switching specifically as a use case, using cookies? I mean, we used it as a demo, but does that mean that it's just a good solution? Yes? There's only two answers here, yes or no, and why, right?
Can't you get the user's like operating system language from like?
So that's a good point. One of the things that is passed up from the request, if we look at any request, not the response, but the request, notice that it talks about language. And that's just talking about like, notice that it's a comma separated list. So it's a preference thing, right? I support English Canadian and English Great Britain. But perhaps if I enabled it, if I was a multilingual thing on my operating system, it would say FR perhaps after that, or maybe before, because that's my first preference. And so browsers are smart enough to read the operating system preference and pass that through, because that's not a privacy security issue. That's a convenience thing, right? I like to read things in French first, right? Now, that doesn't replace the need for being able to switch languages, does it? It just talks about the default, right? And so really all you've done is made it more convenient where it defaults to a better thing than defaulting to English. But it doesn't solve the how do I do language switching? Do I use cookies? You see what I mean? Because somebody who speaks Portuguese is using my computer and want to switch from English to Portuguese, right? And then have that, I guess, be remembered for that site. So I guess let me ask again, is this a good solution for language switching? Think about what's the alternative? Let me ask. You might have used Google Page Translate, fair, but if a website is supporting if it's international, if it's supporting multiple languages, cookies are an option, and there are sites that you'll find that use cookies. But there's another option that you have already probably seen. You just need to recollect.
Oh, you can use the URL.
You can use the URL because we just came up with a solution of storing state in URL before we got to cookies, right? So it could be a question mark lang equals en, or rather even just what you might have seen with certain blogs /en/article information, right? /fr. Right? You've probably come across this when you look up like a New York Times article or something. Like if I go to New York Times right now, New World Times, what? Right? And I click on an article. Yeah, this is pretty crazy. This just happened. Did you guys hear about this? Julian Assange, I don't know how to say his last name, arrested after like 7+ years. It's pretty crazy. Pretty sad. I think it's trending right now on Hacker News. Nope, not anymore. It's third on Hacker News, but still pretty crazy. Lovely login page by Hacker News, eh? Look at that CSS on that page. It's just like Tiny App. Love it. You're on Hacker News when they don't care about the CSS at all. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, on New York Times. I clicked the thing, and then it takes me to an ad. Yeah, what? No, I guess that's still at the article. That's a huge ad. Jesus. Um, okay, so I don't see en anywhere, but let's, I guess, switch languages. How do I do that? The bottom, maybe? Ideally, they should just have it everywhere, right? Maybe not? It was on the homepage, you said?
Yeah, on the top above the nav. English or Spanish or China.
Here we go. Espanol. Notice what it does. Right? And then now when I go to an article, notice what it's doing. It's the thing we talked about with username. Except it's just putting it here. Doesn't really matter, right? It could have decided to put it there as well. But this is just a convention that a lot of sites follow. Right? Start with the language first.
Does the server backend look the same though? It's just like
It would just do like request.params.lang, and lang would be the thing, right? So the way this is implemented, I mean, it may not be an express, but the way this is implemented is something like this. /lang/ then there's a date, right? So like year, month, date, and then there's a title, right? And that's it, right? And then they're able to use those parameters to render the right article in the right language, right? You look confused.
oh no.
No? You're good?
That's just specifically for switching.
Oh, for switching, then they would have like, just like we suggested, we didn't code it, but we talked about how the link would actually have, you know, that in the href.
Yeah.
So it would have / and then, you know. But for the interest of time, I'm not gonna show that, I guess. But yeah, it's just putting it in the URL, right? So why is it that they're doing this way and not cookies? Why is this a better approach these days? Anyone want to take a guess? Remember that in both cases, it's not secret. It's being transmitted. It's just behind the scenes versus in the URL. Oh, good point. Yeah, it doesn't need to be hidden from the URL. But that's not good enough reason to put it in the URL, right? Because we saw we could also put it in cookies. They have slightly different behavior though, don't they? We talked about those differences, didn't we? When I listed out the problems for putting username in the URL. Language doesn't have those problems, you're saying, because the privacy issue isn't there? But what benefits do you get by putting in the URL? Why would they have moved away from cookies? A lot of sites have moved away from, they used to have implemented with cookies, now they've moved away and done it in URL. Why? This hand went up first, so we'll go with you.
Yeah, because well, like for a news article, most of the time you read something you want to share, right?
Yeah.
You want to share in the same language.
Yeah.
So you want to keep a preference in it.
Yeah, you likely want to share the article in the same language. That is the key. Because I'm doing, let's say, a tweet in Spanish. I have Spanish, you know, content, and then I include the URL. What does Twitter do when it sees the URL? It reads some information from the site to just to make a nice little card, right? Or Facebook does the same thing. Well, if we had used cookies, Twitter would have accessed the site. I don't have a marker, but so I'll have to use hands. Oh no, there's a marker right there. If Twitter is accessing our server, this is our HTTP server, then it's not sending the cookie that we had selected for Spanish if we had been using cookies. And so it's just going to say, oh, what's Twitter's default language? Right? Because Twitter's making the request to find out some information from that site to be able to populate the title and the description of that nice little card that makes it easy for people to know what the link is about. And so it'll always come back with English. And so now I have a Spanish tweet with English title and description, which is what as soon as social media started becoming a thing and we started doing this more, sites started moving away from cookie-based solution for languages. Because chances are you want your Spanish audience in that particular context to be able to read that information. And also when they click on it, to default to Spanish, even if that might not be their preferred language for whatever reason. You just click the Spanish tweet, you're expecting to get a Spanish article, right? You know what I mean? Most in that particular example. Cool? So we actually implemented a solution in an archaic way, but I wanted to kind of show you that and then kind of talk about it. It's a good talking point. Now we're going to look at user authentication, because that's what you're going to be implementing today in TinyApp. But before we do, actually, well, why don't we look at this? These problems that we said we're going to solve with cookies. Which of these problems got solved and how? Anyone can start guessing usernames without using the form and try to impersonate someone else. Is this still a problem or not? You're saying it's still a problem. Why?
Because you can, instead of like doing it in the URL, do it in the
Yeah, it's not too hard. It's slightly harder. You have to know about DevTools, but I can go in and, assuming it works or I'm using the right Chrome extension, I can go in and modify the cookie. Right? So not solved. Pretty big security issue. Not solved. If the user accidentally or intentionally shares the link, they are sharing their auth access. Solved because it's no longer in the URL. Every internal link needs to append this. Solved because we're not using the URL. I mean, for language we would be, but for this we would not be, for authentication information. URL contains sensitive info. Solved. Agreed? And then the session is only really active via the URL and therefore not shared across multiple Windows tabs of the browser. But because it is actually, as part of the browser now, it's shared across multiple windows or tabs for that domain. So, solved, right? Or in other words, if the user closes that tab, when they open up another tab, they're not logged in, but in this case they are, with cookies. Yep.
Is there like a default persistence for that, like state, for that sort of a scope, and then you like, I'm now logged in through multiple browsers, when can you be logged out?
So the question is, at what point does it expire your login information? That really depends on the particular use case.
If you don't set a closing, like set timeout or something like that.
Yeah, so it's not set timer, but you're onto something, and you might have read about it. It's the expiration date. So you can say this cookie expires in 2 hours. Like banking sites will say something like, sometimes even 15 minutes. Whereas like, if it's your language preference, because let's say it's an archaic site that's still using cookies for language, it will say something like 2 years or whatever. So yeah. And I think if you don't specify, like we haven't specified it yet, it just means like forever. Which I think just means like, I think it's a value of like -1 or something, instead of some future timestamp. Not really sure. Don't quote me on that, but you get the idea, right? Any other questions? These are great questions. Any others? Notice the awkward pause caused a question. See? Yeah.
Facebook, is that how they remember that you're logged in? Is it just cookies?
That is a good question. Sites like Facebook, do they just use cookies and that's how they know? Absolutely. So I'd like you to, if you want to take a minute, open up a site that you're logged in on, whether it's Facebook or not. Open up your DevTools and click on Application tab right now. I guess I could, but you know, it's my Facebook, which I don't use, but still. So maybe I won't bring it up on the screen, but if somebody could bring theirs up, or everybody could bring theirs up, or if you care, or you could do it later. Maybe I could bring up a site that I'm logged in on that I don't care as much about. So let's bring up Y Combinator. I'm logged in, right? If I go in here, application, cookies, right here, look at what's there. Now they have this interesting thing going on where it's Kvarani and then there's some garbage after. We'll talk about that as well, because you'll be implementing something similar to that for TinyApp. Not exactly this, but something solving the same problem. And this particular one they've decided expires in 20 years.
Just a follow-up question for that.
Yeah.
So if I just copied that and put it into App Configure, could I log in?
That is a great question. What the question is, if I take this now, because we had said that if it was just, we were just using KV as the string, then if it was in the URL, I could copy that. So therefore, if it's in the cookie, I could copy that. It's a great question. Andrew's saying, no, you can't do that. Why not? You want to try it? Should I give my cookie to someone and just trust that they'll delete it after? Who can I trust in this audience? I'll give my hacker news, but you have to promise to delete it right after.
I mean, we can all see.
I mean, but you're not going to copy it. I mean, you can't see the whole thing.
It's being screened, isn't it?
It is, but the whole values, the whole, oh shit. But, the whole, shut up. Yeah, I guess, yeah, fair point. Maybe I won't do it.
I was guessing it was going to be something that refreshes every time you log in.
So the answer, I'll give the answer out. The answer is yes. If I copy this, whether it's Facebook or whatever, I am able to log in as you. So if you're away from your computer, which is why you should always lock your computer, and I could just come in, check, open up your Facebook, you're logged in, or your bank, whatever it is, open up DevTools, copy all your cookies, send them over by email or whatever to myself, use them in my DevTools, and I will be logged in. Sorry? That is how any kind of malicious software or individual, right? We've may have heard of situations where like people have gotten access to an office physically with a USB key that has sort of some automated code where USB plugs in, automatically runs a script, and that script maybe goes into your Chrome folder and grabs all your cookies and dumps into the USB key. Off you go. Done. I have all your authentication information within a second. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, if I use a different computer, do my cookies transfer over? There's services now like Google that, are trying to take over the world, I guess. And in doing so, they're offering more value proposition. One value prop is, oh yeah, and Firefox does this too, right? Like, you can be logged in on your phone too if you use the same browser. The magic there is they're just taking this, just like the USB thing, and they're saving it on the cloud and hoping that nobody hacks that. And then it's now available when you log in as the same individual. The cookie information is stored actually in the cloud now, not just in your browser, if you enable that functionality, right? Similar to like iCloud keychain, same concept, right? You put your credentials, in this case, you put your cookie information in a server now, where it's now shared across devices. But that's a convenience thing. They're still stored on the browser, it's just that they're synced now via a server. Great questions, guys. Yep. Wow. For your local cookies, you have to go into your account preferences on the website? Jesus. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I cleared my cookies. I'm not one that gets worried about that kind of stuff, but definitely there are reasons to get worried about that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you're one of those people, then yeah, we should all be concerned about that. Right? There's like crazy amounts of tracking and data that Google is able to do now that they've taken over the market in terms of browsers. Firefox has like single-digit market share, which is scary as hell, and then they're now using that dominance to further their understanding of where people go and what people do, right? Yeah, I've heard about this. I've heard flight prices actually, depending on which country you're actually accessing it from. Like if you're looking at Ryanair prices, but if you're in Europe, then they'll give you, and depending on your language preference. I don't know if this is like, I don't know if this is true or not. So this could all just be like conspiracy theory. I've just heard people actually say me like, it happened to me. So I don't know.
Do you know like the hotels, like hotel.com, say you're looking for a hotel, you click it first, you click out and go to another hotel. When you want to go back to the first hotel, look at it, it's like, oh, we're running out of rooms, sorry.
They do clever like little marketing things where they'll say things like the hotels. Yeah, yeah.
Have you booked within 10 minutes?
That's definitely marketing. Yeah, that's definitely like when you walk into a store and they're like, yeah, there's a sale going on. After they see a certain kind of behavior, maybe then they tell you versus not, right? That's similar tactics. So it's only borderline unethical, right? It's not really unethical. Unethical is like maybe what Google's doing on this stuff, right? Giving you different prices based on where you are and language. That's, I think, getting a little bit dodgy, right? Yeah. That's personalization, right? So if we all get different search results, that's personalization. Probably not cookie for that, because your cookies don't contain all your history. The server does. So yeah, it'll have some identifier on you, like who you're logged in as on Google. Then it will go fetch from the database your information enough to personalize your results. So it's, yes, you're right, it's enabled by cookies because the cookies are identifying who you are. But then it takes it from there on the server side. No, because cookies are not. This is an important question. Cookies are not meant to keep a lot of your sensitive information. I mean, it's already bad enough that if it's copied, you can impersonate me. But imagine if it's not only can you impersonate me, but you have all my history. That would be even worse. And not necessary, because once you have my secret information here, you have access to that whole slew of information indirectly by accessing it as me, and then Google is able to read from their servers what history there is about me. Cookies have a max limit of, I think, 2,000 characters, like literally 2,000 like letters. They're not meant to store large amounts of data. I don't know. Don't quote me. It might be 4,000, but you get the idea. That's coming from the server side. So Google is, or wherever the service is using your cookie to identify who you are. Then on the server side, making a request to their database from the table. We'll get into databases later, but yeah, and then they're able to populate that.
One more quick question. Does each browser have its own cookie folder, or is there like one cookie folder that's shared?
The question is, does each browser have its own cookie folder on the disk, or is it shared? Definitely not shared, and the reason for that is my Firefox cookies should not be shown in my Chrome. That is a pretty crazy security issue, right? So they don't, unless there's some, yeah, maybe one day they will say there's a way to import. I think there even is today to import cookies, but then they read from the other folder. You're giving them that permission. Actually, scary enough, they don't need your permission because they're in application, but they're behaving well and not going ahead and reading your cookies from Firefox. That would be really unethical. Yeah. We're at 10:57, and I know we started 15 minutes late, so I did say that we're gonna need another 20 minutes if that's cool with people. Okay, hopefully I haven't exhausted you with my words, because there's still more to talk about. I want to quickly demo the user authentication, show you what that looks like, and then we will talk a little bit more about security. Okay? So, without further ado, let's take a look at user auth. I'm going to switch folders here. And I'm going to run that particular server. It's called server.js, and we'll bring that up. So let's close these French and English. We don't need this user. Yep, here we go. And here we have server.js, which has, this is already implemented. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to implement this with you, but it'll be in the notes. Okay? This is not how you will implement it's not exactly how you'll implement your user authentication, because in TinyApp, you do have to implement cookies to do user authentication. So this code will not directly help you, although the logic and the flow of it will help you. Okay? So what this is doing is, it's not anything to do with TinyApp, but there is a concept of users. And so I faked out some users in an object, similar to URLs. Okay? And I've just put the username and password in the information for each user. So far, you with me? And then there's a secret page called treasure. And that's your profile page. You can only view that if you are logged in. And so we don't just go ahead and render treasure. We only render it if we successfully authenticate you. Is there a fire alarm test planned for today? Great answer. I think we should probably. What do you think, Davey? Is there a speaker where they make the announcement? Okay. There are video recordings of me doing this exact same lecture before, so don't worry. And I have my notes, so I'm not too stressed about not going through this stuff. Okay, neither should you. Okay, let's all not die. Head over.